This is episode 3 of the AR&IO Chinese language course. Way back in episode 2, I hinted at a distinction between 抗议 and other less flattering words for political protest. Let me tell you something. In this life, one man's protest is another man's riot. When you look at this photograph, do you see a protest or do you see a riot? When I first saw this headline, 加台, so this is not a quotation from the article, this is just the headline of the article. I assumed this was going to be about Thailand, because Taiguo is the way we say Thailand in modern standard Mandarin Chinese. But no, Jiatai is actually Catalonia. This is the short form of the name of the country, Catalonia, in Chinese, right? So, 加台骚乱继续.
加泰骚乱继续.
The next part of the headline is somewhat bizarre. If you recognize the word hudia, you can guess the meaning. This is suggesting to you that there are continuing riots in Catalonia as part of a butterfly effect, somehow indirectly linked to the protests or the riots in Hong Kong. You can probably read about the same events, for example, recent protests in Hong Kong, and one newspaper might describe it as a protest, and another may describe it as a riot. I'll have my lovely assistant read this out to you in perfect Chinese in just a moment, but the sentence begins, 香港国际机场瘫痪. I think you might just want to skip the word 瘫痪. We're going to cover a lot of vocabulary in this lesson. Here, the meaning is economic paralysis. In other contexts, it would mean paralysis in the sense of a physical disease. But now let's hear the sentence as a whole. Given that Hong Kong airport has been paralyzed, would we really call these protests, or would we call this a riot?
香港国际机场瘫痪，抗议还是骚乱?
My lovely assistant is reading you a real-world example of a headline on a news item. 抗议还是骚乱? Is this a protest, or is this a riot?
抗议还是骚乱?
You may have noticed that there are some words I dwell on for quite a long time, and there are some I skip over quickly. Because some of these words, they're not merely more interesting, but they're words or characters you will use intensively starting from level 1 in Chinese. So I did not spend any time at all discussing the word for paralysis, whereas 乱, 抗, and yi, 3 of these 4 characters we started this episode with, those are characters you really need to know. Those are characters you are going to be using intensively already at level 1 in speaking, reading, and writing Chinese. If English is your second language, you need to memorize the word riot just for that one context, just for that one meaning. And then the word riot will only come up in rare and extraordinary circumstances when you're talking about politics and history and so on. But 乱, one half of the word for riot in Chinese, actually is a character that you're going to see and use day after day already at level 1 in Chinese. That's because Chinese, unlike English, will take this one character and use it in different combinations with a range of remarkable meanings. So studying Chinese is in this way quite intellectually stimulating. Here we see 乱, handwritten on a sign here in the mountains of central Taiwan. So I took this photograph myself. I was walking down the street and I noticed this sign someone had put up. And this also draws our attention to the tremendous challenge ordinary people have in coping with the complexity of the Chinese language. This is not calligraphy, but the person who wrote this using a felt-tipped marker, you can imagine they really took some time to write this correctly. And you can see 乱 is correctly assembled from each of its constituent parts, even though it doesn't quite have the verve of outright calligraphic Chinese. And you can imagine this person was really quite angry and frustrated with people leaving litter, leaving garbage on their tiny garden in the front of their house. And I would assume it took them at least 30 minutes to write out this sign. Once you get into writing short essays, you also will realize how tremendously time-consuming it is to write something out by hand in the Chinese language, as opposed to typing it on a computer and typing it on your phone. Many, many Chinese people, I would say today, the majority of Chinese people can type luan, but would not be capable of writing it correctly and accurately, even though, as I've been emphasizing, luan is not just a character you're going to see associated with riots. It's not just going to come up in the discussion of politics and history. This is, in fact, a symbol that comes up every day in your life, living in China or speaking Chinese, precisely because it has these other uses, like luandiu. So how are you possibly going to remember and practice writing this character luan accurately? This is where the study of Chinese etymology is not merely of historical interest, but is of very real practical value in our lives here and now. Look at the top left corner of the screen. You'll see that I'm drawing your attention to the resemblance between luan and very common level 1 vocabulary like cai. You're looking there at the symbol, or the radical, of a hand reaching downward. At the bottom of the left-hand side of luan, you then have a hand reaching upward, and that particular symbol for a hand in the bottom left corner of the character could be familiar to you from common characters like the yo in pengyo meaning friend. Again, level 1 vocabulary. In between the two hands, you have a confusing mess of brushstrokes. What this is very imperfectly rendering in 21st century Chinese, silk on a loom being worked by two hands coming together. There is a very close resemblance between this luan and the common character ru.
Ru.
Ru is a word that vegans need to get familiar with immediately. It's used more like our word dairy in English rather than the word milk itself, so dairy products. If you're reading the ingredients on the side of packaged processed food, you really need to learn to watch out for ru. It also does mean breast and breast milk and so on. So sometimes it does mean breast in reference to human anatomy, and sometimes the meaning is dairy, as in dairy products like yogurt and so on. Top left corner of ru, again, you can see this radical of a hand reaching downward. The bottom left corner is the child. I guess you could say the child growing upward. In the center of the screen, you see a really ancient attempt to draw this character where it is a true pictograph. You can see the mother embracing the child. But on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the way in which this was stylized or systematized into three separate radicals: the hand reaching down, the child reaching upward, and then the single line on the right-hand side of the character is here supposed to symbolize the human breast. In this case, we really do know the whole history of this written character. We know the symbolic meaning of each of its parts and how they're assembled to have a new symbolic meaning as a whole. This is rare. This is extraordinary. And this also reminds us of the limitations of Chinese etymology, the limitations of breaking characters down to their pieces and offering an analysis, component by component, because the truth is the single hooked brushstroke on the right-hand side of ru does not have the same symbolic meaning or value when we see it on the right-hand side of luan. We are encouraged to imagine that on the right-hand side of luan, this is a stray strand of thread, whereas the character as a whole is depicting two hands coming together and working with a bundle of silk thread. And then this one line is a strand of thread that got away. That sounds to me like a story that school teachers made up rather than a real etymology of the character. But in any case, these are the limitations of learning the characters component by component. But if you don't learn the etymology and the history of the characters, you are just left with having to memorize a mess of meaningless lines. But there's good news! The good news is, once you put in the effort to learn these incredibly difficult characters, they come up again and again, even within level 1 vocabulary. Back in episode 2, this word kang, or this character kang, came up in 2 very different contexts. We talked about kangyi, meaning to protest, a political protest, a protest march, but it also came up in the history of China's war against Japan. And this same character Kang, I even see it every day. Here I am holding up proudly a household cleaning product I own. You're going to see it on store shelves. You're going to see it every time you go to the pharmacy or the grocery store. Kangjun, antibacterial. In some contexts, we would say antibiotic. The word for antibiotic or antibacterial is a struggle against bacteria, in the same way that in a political and historical context, we talk about the war being a struggle against the Japanese.
这是军区卫生部的于部长
Health Commissioner Yu. Norman Bethune of the Canadian American Medical Unit reporting for duty.
加美医疗队队长诺尔曼白奇温向你报道。欢迎啊，欢迎你啊，白奇温大夫！
欢迎白奇温大夫！欢迎白奇温大夫！欢迎白奇温同志！欢迎白奇温同志！国际主义万岁！国际主义万岁！
为了帮助中国的抗日战争，1937年来到中国。
There are many, many ways to express the purpose of an action in Chinese. There are many ways to say that you are doing one thing in order to accomplish another. But the teacher I worked with in Kunming, China for many months, she always insisted to me that I should avoid using 为了 altogether. I think this is partly because of the gap between written Chinese and spoken Chinese. Sometimes they seem like 2 separate languages. I would guess it's also because of the gap between textbook Chinese, the somewhat simplified way that Chinese is taught to foreigners, and the reality of how native Chinese speakers actually communicate, whether in writing or in speech. But I was told again and again and again, no, don't use 为了. And what you see here on screen, this sentence fragment, it's not really even a complete sentence, does indeed begin with 为了. So in order to help China in its struggle against Japan, remember we learned Kang earlier in this episode. So this is normally translated as the anti-Japanese war, 抗日战争。
为了帮助中国的抗日战争。
And then we have the date when he arrived in China.
1937年来到中国。
As I've now shared with you my teacher's warning that 为了 should be avoided, perhaps, in our own written compositions and when speaking Chinese as foreigners, how about I give you an alternative? Here is the sentence pattern 为的是. This is a slightly hilarious example from my favorite textbook. See if you can guess what happens next. I've highlighted the word pay, just in case you don't know it, or maybe you don't know any of the vocabulary in this sentence. Pay is the main verb. When I was first learning Chinese, it always helped me immensely if I could figure out which words were the verbs in the sentence, and then sort of see the rest of the sentence structure organized around that.
他怎么老陪他儿子去健身房？
Even if you're starting at level 1 or level 0 in Chinese, you should get the general drift that this is a question with 怎么, and then we have a reply that's going to begin with 为的是. 为的是 is going to tell us in order to do something. It's going to tell us the purpose of an action. So the question is,
他怎么老陪?
You've already been warned that pay is the main verb in the sentence, but pay is one of those words that your teachers and textbooks will conspire to avoid teaching you. And no, not for any kind of political reason, but just because it's unbelievably confusing and not too terribly useful. Look, I know that pay and bu are 2 completely different words, but you have to admit, if you were confronted with these two symbols on the final exam on a multiple choice test, you might get them mixed up. It's essay composition or whatever. I think that teachers and textbooks have just decided that the world would be a better place if foreigners could get through their first few years of studying Chinese without having to learn and practice the difference between pei and bu, because they are two painfully similar looking Chinese characters. So our first sentence is asking, why does she always accompany her son to the gym? 健身房, gym. And then our answer comes with 为的是. And look, guys, I gotta admit to you, some of these things in language, they come down to a matter of opinion. My teacher was of the opinion that we should avoid using 为了, and I'm of the opinion that 为的是 sounds more conversational, sounds more like real-world 21st century Chinese, and this is a very conversational, colloquial, real-world 21st century Chinese answer.
为的是让他的胖儿子减肥。
So why does she always go with her son to the gym? You could translate this as, in order to help her son lose weight. You could translate it as that she's allowing her son to lose weight. In some contexts, the verb 让 really is more like allow, but probably here in plain English, to make her son lose weight. And the function of 为的是, beginning the sentence, lets you know that the answer is going to tell you the purpose or the objective that the question was asking about.
Abdominal bullet wounds. We must work fast.
腹部多处中弹，要抢救。
He's lost too much blood. We must give him a transfusion immediately.
他失血过多，必须马上输血。可是，血浆粉用完了呀。
令，快来，抽我的血。抽我的血。
So what is Dr. Bethune doing in this dramatic scene? 有一天，一个伤员需要做手术。手术 is operation.
手术
伤员.
伤员
Note that we've had this word 员 before. We talked about it at some length in an earlier episode. Here, it gives us the sense of a wounded person. More often, we know it from words that mean a staff member, an employee, or Communist Party member, right?
有一天，一个伤员需要做手术，伤员流血太多，已经昏迷了。看到这种情况，报求人大夫说要输血。
有一天，一个伤员需要做手术，伤员流血太多。
伤员流血太多。
He's lost too much blood.
伤员流血太多。
伤员流血太多。
He's lost too much blood.
伤员流血太多。
We must give him a transfusion immediately.
已经昏迷了。看到这种情况，白求恩大夫说要输血。
他失血过多，必须马上输血。
要输血。
必须马上输血。
抽我的血。抽我的血。没有时间验血，我是 O 型的。令，快来。
这时候，白求恩大夫坚决地说：“抽我的。” You should remember the verb 抽. Remember 抽? Remember it from an earlier lesson? See, it's all coming back. All the stuff we did in the earlier lessons comes up again later on. If you remember the meaning of cho, you have half a chance at guessing the meaning of the sentence.